more than just the amazing people that have come. Okay, we are live. Excellent. All right. I need my phone because that's where my notes are.
Oh, wait, you don't know it.
No, not off by heart. You're going to hear some things today that you've not heard from me before. For better or for worse. I'll let you guys decide that when I'm done. But we need to talk. We need to talk specifically about civil disobedience and the role of civil disobedience in making change. It's been a dirty word for a long time. And to be completely honest, some of us are responsible for making it a dirty word. If you've been like me, I grew up as a conservative. And obedience to the law was kind of paramount. You had to do what the law said, even if you disagreed with it. If you disagree, you should get into politics and you should change it. Has anyone ever heard that or said that to somebody else? Yeah, most of us have heard it at least once. I used to say it to people. I'm ashamed to admit. Civil disobedience, I have come to recognize, is not only important, but in many moments in history, it is the only force that has actually worked to reduce the overbearing power and scope of government. So this is what I want to talk about today. And I thought, this is something I've wanted to talk about for a while. But when I saw the opportunity to come to the Caledonian, I thought, what better place to begin this conversation than here, where we've seen a wonderful example of exactly that from Shane and from Brad. Can we get a round of applause for these guys? They're probably busy working and have no idea, but make sure you shake their hand, spend lots of money. No, here he is. Here he is. Make sure you spend lots of money tonight. My hope is that these guys, when they look at the till later tonight, go, yeah, that was a great night. So that's my hope tonight. The thing is, in Australia, we have tens of thousands of pages of laws. In addition to which, we also have regulations written by all of our myriad of regulatory bodies. Then, of course, we have court precedent, judgments that then influence how certain laws can or can't be interpreted. And then, of course, we have state and repeat regulatory bodies and judgments. And then, of course, we have local. My point is, it is not possible for one human being to read the entire law, much less remember it, much less obey it. It simply isn't possible. It gets even worse every year, though, because they keep writing new ones. It seems like where does this end? They've got tens of thousands of pages and they still think they need another one and then another one. Obedience is actually impossible. And here's the challenge I have for you tonight. Continuing to try and obey is part of the problem and actually allows them to keep making it worse. No other method of limiting government has ever worked as well as civil disobedience. And I'm talking about non-violent civil disobedience. I'll talk about revolution in a second. Think about history. Think through history and the moments when it's been possible to cut a government down to size or make massive social change that has set people free. I think probably the most recent example in modern history would be the civil rights movement in the US, where we finally saw a whole lot of laws abolished that treated some human beings as though they were inferior to others. That didn't start with a political campaign. It started with civil disobedience. It didn't start right at the very beginning with Rosa Parks, but she's probably one of the most famous early civil disobedience practitioners. And she kicked off a chain of events. It took 10 years for her to be vindicated. She was a criminal for years. She was called all kinds of things in the media. She was accused of wanting bloodshed. She was accused of all kinds of things. She was a pariah. And then she won. That's how civil disobedience works. Peaceful civil disobedience, where you as the disobeyer remain in honor, and they as the oppressor, as the lawmaker, as the law enforcer, have to go into dishonor with violence against a non-violent person, is incredibly effective. It shames those in power. It shames those who are enforcing those rules. It pricks the conscience of those who cower under the rules. And in time, it inspires others to join you. That's the power of civil disobedience. Thomas Jefferson, when America, the American colonies as they were known, chose to take up arms against King George, coined a phrase, when tyranny becomes law, rebellion becomes duty. Now, they were facing genuine tyranny. They were facing a dictator in the form of a king who had absolutely no moral qualms and was obedient to no law except what he decided he wanted to obey. They were faced with a genuine tyrant, and they pulled off a genuine rebellion. I would argue it's just about the last time when violent rebellion has actually worked. Not that it'll never work again, but look at the French Revolution, look at many other revolutions. They go out of the frying pan and into the fire. They overthrow the system they have, and they end up with something that's even worse. I'm not interested in overthrowing our system. I'm not interested in revolution. I'm interested in restoration. I'm interested in us working together to get back what was given to us by our ancestors. That birthright of freedom, that correctly functioning political system, which we haven't seen now for decades, but that correctly functioning political system that gave us a voice and gave us the ability to have a say in how we were governed. In 1854, at the Eureka Stockade, they slightly adjusted Jefferson's words, and I like their version better. It says, when injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. And I think that's the correct phrase for our time. What we're facing is injustice, and resistance is our duty. When there are tens of thousands of pages of law, injustice is automatic. Injustice is inherent. Imagine writing more laws than any human being can possibly read or remember or understand, and then turning around and saying, oh, but ignorance of the law is no excuse under the law. Tell me that's not an injustice. The system has become unjust by its sheer weight and size, and it can be no other way until it is made smaller. And I don't mean by a little bit. Here's my thinking. I've read the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Any other nerds here? You've read the Lord of the Rings trilogy? Okay. I read the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy actually a couple of times in my life. There are still things that I've forgotten, right? So if we are accountable to be obedient to every single law and ignorance is no excuse, I think the law has to be at least smaller than the trilogy, right? If I've forgotten bits of the trilogy, well, it's still too big. And when we get there, let's talk about ignorance is no excuse. Let's have that conversation then. But you know, not even lawyers have read the entire law. They can't. You talk to a lawyer, they'll tell you, oh, that's not my area. I'm in family law. I'm in corporate law. I'm in international law. I'm in this, I'm in that. They all have to specialize so narrowly. Why? Because the law is too big. It's not possible, even for a lawyer whose job and profession is to spend their entire life in the law. It's not possible to know. And that is an injustice to which it is our duty to resist. When laws like the ones we've seen in the last 2 years get passed and enforced, there is injustice. There can be no doubt about that. I have a t-shirt that says, good people break bad laws. And people ask me about that, and they say, hey, how do you know what's a bad law? Isn't this anarchy if everyone's just guessing what they think is a bad law? No, it's really simple. If obeying the law hurts people and breaking the law helps people, then the law is the problem. You've got a bad law on your hands. And when we were locked down and businesses shut down, we're all inside our homes. I'm from Victoria. For those that don't know, I'm from Melbourne. The world champion in lockdowns. Yes. Number one. Thank you very much. There's not much we can claim anymore, but we are number one in lockdowns. And behind every one of those closed doors were people suffering. People going bankrupt in silence, unheard by the rest of us. Families breaking down, mental health being pushed to breaking point. The law was killing far more people than it was saving. Yeah. And I put it to you, the only just and moral thing to do when the law is causing harm is to disobey it.
Yes. Yes.
It is not the job of politicians to decide what is right and what is wrong. What is right and what is wrong is right and wrong no matter what they write into the law. It doesn't change. When they change the law today, they have not changed the laws of nature. They have not changed the laws of God. It is the job of a politician to try and align the law as it is written as closely as possible with what we already know to be good and to be wrong. That's their job. Get the law to align with what is right and wrong. They don't define it. And when they turn around and they say, we've written a law, you're a prisoner in your own home. No, that's wrong. We've written a law, you can't keep your job unless you consent to an experimental medical procedure. That is wrong.
Oh, that's fucking wrong.
It was wrong before they said it. It's wrong after they said it. Nothing they say can or will ever change the fact that it's wrong. They didn't. You're quite right. They didn't. When laws like we've seen in the last 2 years get passed, we know that injustice is now systemic. The people that work in the system, as well-intentioned as they may be, are actually now enforcing injustice every time they do their job. We have reached a point where injustice is an inherent part of our system. And that means the time has come and our duty is to peacefully resist. I want to commend Shane and Brad. I want to commend all the staff that weathered that storm along with them. And I want to commend the locals and the patrons and the supporters that stood by them and still stand by them today. What we've seen is an example of what peaceful civil disobedience should look like. And I wish more and more people would find the courage to take the same stand that we saw from Shane and Brad. Myself, I'm facing criminal charges in Victoria for incitement, which is a fancy way of saying that I encouraged people to exercise their human right to protest against a government that had lost its mind. The question was, when am I going to court? I was supposed to be in court in January. We've deferred it till March, end of March, so coming up very soon. In my view, it's in my interest to defer it for as long as possible because the tide is moving in my favour when it comes to that court case. So, now here's the funny thing. Political communication, I am a political commentator. By its nature, pretty much everything I do is political communication, is protected under the Australian Constitution and has been ratified multiple times and found to exist multiple times by the full bench of the High Court. Good. The Victorian government has the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and Responsibilities, which guarantees me as a Victorian resident the right to protest. Isn't that funny how that doesn't work when you're protesting against them? I note that
Anything else except COVID related.
I note with interest that they had no problem with BLM protests and a few others along the way. Exactly. I'll say it again. I am being charged with a crime by an elected government. Don't con yourself into thinking that democracy protects you. For encouraging people to peacefully exercise their human right to engage in political protest. That is where Australia is at today. Put aside whatever you think we are, whatever we used to be when you were a kid or when you arrived here. That's who we've become. I'll say it again. When injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. I did my duty. Brad and Shane and everyone that supported them did their duty. Nothing more, nothing less. And what we need to see is more Australians willing to do their duty. I want to go back to Rosa Parks for a moment. When she refused to sit at the back of the bus, she wasn't fighting for her rights or a better view on the bus. She was fighting for every single person that was oppressed under the system that they had in that day in the United States.
Yes.
People called her selfish. I put it to you, it's the people that didn't fight that were selfish.
Yes.
It's the people who cower in their homes, afraid of what someone might say about them, and betray their next door neighbor to despair and poverty and bankruptcy and possibly suicide. Those are the people who are selfish. The ones who stood with me on the streets of Melbourne facing armed battalions of police officers with shoot-on-sight orders were not the selfish ones. The ones who stayed home wear that crown. This is a decision time for all of us. Who are you? And who will you be when your grandchildren look at you and say, Granddaddy, Grandmummy, what did you do? What will your answer be? I can tell you, Brad and Shane, they're going to answer that question quickly and with pride. Yeah? I will answer that question with pride. I want you to make choices that allow you to answer that question with pride.
Well, I'm a freedom fighter, mate.
Good on you.
Cheers.
Cheers to you.
Now, Rosa Parks was a criminal. It was more than 10 years, more than a decade before there was meaningful reform that actually started to recognize that she was right all along. I have another saying that most of you will have heard. It sucks to be right early. Yeah? I'm living that right now. These guys are living that right now, but we're not the first. Yeah, we're all living that now. But this has been true for all of history. It sucks to be right early. It's easy to be right when everyone else has figured it out as well. That costs you nothing. But to see what is right and stand for what is right before everybody else has figured it out, that sucks. But that's also what makes a difference. And I'm in the business of living a life that makes a difference. So it's a price that I'm willing to pay. I mentioned the amount of laws, tens of thousands of pages. Many more are being written. You might ask the question, why? Well, have a think about it. At what point is any politician or bureaucrat ever going to look at the world and say, you know what? I think we're done here. I think we've written all the laws. Oh, we can go home. This is great. When is that ever going to happen? Never. They are always going to find the next thing. They are always going to have a reason why they need a bigger budget, more employees, more enforcement powers. That is the nature of the beast. It is the kind of work that they are in, and it is the kind of psychology that is attracted to that work. They always want more. If only you gave me a little bit more power over your life, then I could fix all of the world's problems. That's the kind of person that gets into these roles, and they will never stop. So it's up to us.
Well, they will when we hang it.
I'm not going to repeat that for the recording. They will only stop when we draw a line and say no. No further. And in fact, you know what? Forget this line. Start backing up, buddy. Start repealing some of that crap. Let's cut those laws and regulations down until it's about the size of Lord of the Rings, shall we? Let's get there and then we'll have a conversation. And until we're there, you just keep on backing it up, buddy. That's what we've got to get to. But we're not going to get there without being willing to stand up, without being willing to resist, without being willing to peacefully but firmly, civilly disobey. Because when we disobey, we take away their power. And when we take away their power, they have to start giving ground until they finally reach a point where we're willing to respect their power again. And we'll just keep them marching backwards for as long as we possibly can. What do we do? Oh, one more point on that. These legislators, you know why we call them legislators? Because they legislate. They write rules. The regulators, you know why we call them regulators? Because they regulate. They write regulations. If all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If all you have is legislation, everything gets fixed with legislation. If all you have is regulation, everything gets fixed with regulation. This is why they will never stop. It's up to us. So what do we do? Practically, what do we do, right? We've had hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of Melbourne. We've seen insane crowds in Canberra, and well done to each and every one of you that's made the effort to get to Canberra. Thank you. But Daniel Andrews is still in power in Victoria. ScoMo's still in power in Canberra.
Are they really then, though?
People ask me the question all the time, what did you achieve with all those protests? And Victoria is an important case to look at. You know, we had this guy called Adam Somyurek. Have you guys heard of Adam Somyurek up here? Okay. Oh, he Somyureked him, all right. Now, he was the first. Now, I think her name is Kyalisha. I always stuff her name up. I'm sorry. There's another MP that has turned against Daniel Andrews from the Labor Party. She was testifying in front of IBAC today. I haven't caught up with what she said, but I'm looking forward to seeing what she said because I expect it's going to be pretty explosive. Things are turning. The United Firefighters Union, a core part of Daniel Andrews' support base, is now going to war with him right now. Now, he completely destroyed the CFA on behalf of the UFU to shore up his power with them. Now they're turning their back on him. Bit by bit, chip by chip, the cracks in the dam are forming, and at some point that dam's going to burst open. Sorry for a flood analogy. I know it's in bad taste right now, but that dam is going to burst, and Daniel Andrews is going to get flushed out to sea, right? Yeah. It's going to happen. I don't know when, but it is going to happen. Now, would Somyurek and these others have come forward if there weren't hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of Melbourne? These aren't good guys. Somyurek's not a good guy. He's a narcissist. He's the same as the rest of them. But he saw an opportunity to redeem himself in the eyes of hundreds of thousands of people. If those people weren't there, he would have stayed under the rock that he'd been hiding under for 18 months. Right? Yep. By getting out there and doing what we did, we turned the tide. We went from being on the defense to being on the offense. And no, we haven't won yet. But we completely changed the direction of the war in Victoria. I firmly believe that. I want to give you another even clearer example. Has anyone here ever heard of Canadian truckers? Yeah. Right, okay. Just a few of you. Okay. Yeah. All right. So, hello, Chloe. How are you? I probably won't let you crawl up here, babe. Okay? Not a good idea. So, did you know that on the 14th of this month, only about 5 or so days away, here we go, here she comes. Chloe, everybody. And now she's going to scream. In just a couple of days' time, all of the mandates end in Canada. The whole lot. Gone. Mask gone. Social distancing gone. The whole lot is gone. Now, let me tell you about the chain of events that led up to that. Because according to their little dictator, what's his name? Castro. Oh, sorry, Trudeau. So, Freudian slip. Yeah, Trudeau, yeah. According to him, of course, the truckers had nothing to do with it. But let's follow a chain of events here. The truckers parked in Ottawa, refused to move. The police, they had some good days and some bad days, but overall they were at least ineffective, and many of them were unwilling to start removing the trucks. A lot of the tow truck companies said, no, forget about it. We're not touching this. So the trucks were there, and they weren't going anywhere. Justin Trudeau invokes his emergency powers, reveals himself as a little dictator that he is, and through sheer force, finally intimidates and bullies the truckers into leaving. Trudeau won, right? Not so fast. The truckers leave. The problem for Trudeau is that in order for his invocation of the emergency powers to stand, it has to pass the lower and upper houses of the Canadian Parliament within a certain period of time. So he can make the declaration, start using the laws straight away, but he's only got a narrow window before it has to go before Parliament. And he knew for a fact it was never going to get through the upper house. He knew that. It got through the lower house, same as legislation does. The government always gets it through the lower house. But he knew it wasn't going to make it through the upper house. And he had a problem Because what if he's exercising these powers and then the upper house says, no, you don't. You don't get those powers. What happens to the powers that he already used? Were they lawful or not? There's a certain level of constitutional crisis and lack of clarity around all of that. And pardon the French, but he shat himself. And he withdrew those powers voluntarily. You understand? Not because of the truckers or because of anything else. No, voluntarily. The problem is, as soon as he withdraws the powers, what are the truckers going to do? And he knows it. So he has to do what the truckers wanted. What did the truckers want? End to mandates, end to segregation, end to masking and all that other nonsense, lockdowns, all the rest of it. So what does he do? He says, it's okay, guys. Omicron, times have changed. We can get rid of all of the mandates. 14th of March, thank you very much. He didn't do that of his own free will. That was the truckers. 100%. They won that war. We're not Canada. And Australia is not Victoria. So our stories are going to be different. And what has to happen now is going to be different to what had to happen in Victoria in 2020 and 2021. But I want to go back to 1776. It says too much 1984, not enough 1776. What happened in 1776? Boston Tea Party. The beginning of a chain of events that over 3 years led to the Declaration of Independence, of the American colonies declaring independence against the British Empire. Going to war with quite literally the biggest military force the world had ever seen at that time. They had to go into genuine rebellion because they were facing a genuine tyranny. I don't think we're at tyranny stage yet. It's a fine line, I'll agree, but I think we're at injustice stage, definitely. I think that's very hard to argue against. So I think we're at the stage where resistance, peaceful resistance, is the order of the day. And until we've exhausted every peaceful option, we shouldn't be thinking about the other ones. Let's exhaust every peaceful option. Restoration of the rights that are ours by birthright can be achieved, in my opinion, through a two-pronged attack. Political, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment, and civil disobedience. Because you'll be amazed at how much more effective a politician becomes when they've got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people at their back, deliberately disobeying civilly. We saw it on the streets of Melbourne. David Limbrick and Tim Quilty, two amazing Victorian MPs for the Liberal Democrats. They've been standing with us all the way through. They were ignored until all of a sudden there were tens of thousands of people on the streets of Melbourne. And now suddenly the media started listening to them. Suddenly when they asked questions in Parliament, they landed and they had to get some decent answers for them. All of a sudden their authority increased because everyone could see that they were speaking for an enormous number of people who were not being represented by anybody else. Liberals couldn't claim us. Liberal Party, useless. Worse than useless. Labor, obviously down there, they're the problem. They're the ones in power. No other party could claim us. Everyone knew that the Liberal Democrats were the ones speaking for us. No offense to the other parties, it's just they're the ones with MPs in the Victorian government right now. We have to fight on two fronts. Civil disobedience and politics. Civil disobedience, I think I've spoken enough about. We all get it, right? Doesn't mean run out there and, I don't know, do whatever the hell you want.
No, but we're all good at civilly disobeying.
Yeah. I think Australians are getting a lot better at civil disobedience. The last 2 years, I think, have taught a lot of us a lot of important lessons in that regard. So I want to finish by talking about politics. Because honestly, let me put it to you this way. We've had hundreds of thousands of people on the streets of Melbourne protesting. We've had huge crowds in Canberra. When we get to the federal election, which is now no more than about 2 months away, when we get there, if the voting habits of people haven't changed, what does that say about the protests?
Vote the sitting member last.
Sitting member last is a very good start. We'll talk in more detail in a minute. But just think, from a political party's point of view, Liberal Party along with their Nationals lackeys, the Labor Party along with their Greens lapdog, they're looking at the polling and they're a little bit worried and they're like, okay, we've seen some massive protests, bigger than the protests against the Vietnam War, bigger than any other protests we've ever seen for climate or anything else. What do we do? Is this going to hurt us come election time? Well, what do they think if it doesn't hurt them come election time? They ignore us. They go, oh, it doesn't matter how much noise they make. It doesn't matter how many people are at the protest. They just vote for us anyway. They just come crawling back. That's what they are going to conclude if we don't weren't worthy of being scrutinized. That's my. They didn't say it that way. I mean, that's not what their press release said. Let's just say, but that's what they said, right? Sorry. Have they? I'm not aware of this. Okay, fill me in. Okay, that's news to me. I'm going to try and get to the bottom of that. Thank you. So for the recording, which is now has the camera, the microphone facing the wrong way. What I was just informed then, which is news to me, apparently the AEC have backpedaled and said that that's not the case. So I'll try and get to the bottom of that. But thank you, I appreciate that. Okay, so guys, make sure you sign up, become a financial member. Make sure you volunteer. Give these parties boots on the ground. Did you know that the major parties are actually every political party that gets above a certain percentage gets paid by the taxpayer for every single vote? 4%. And they raised the percentage from, it was like 1.2% or 1.5%. They raised the minimum percentage up to 4% to try and cut the minor parties out of that pie. They are deliberately gaming the voting system to try and ensure that they have budget for big campaigns and TV ads and billboards and all the rest of it, and nobody else does. You can't necessarily donate enough money to make up for that deficit, but you could certainly help as a pair of boots on the ground, right? That's what these guys need. So I commend each and every one of these people to you. Please talk to them, find out what they need, go onto the websites of all the respective parties, check out their policies, and pick one. Let me tell you in advance, by the way, none of them are perfect. Don't go looking for a perfect party. Don't go looking for a perfect politician. Just pick the one that you hate the least. Okay? Can you do that? All right, thank you so much, guys. Take a seat. We can turn this around and we can earn back for ourselves the freedoms that were given to us by our ancestors. They were hard won. We inherited more than 1,000 years of political and legal history when they wrote our Constitution and they brought English common law into it, when they designed our system of government, the way that our elections work. There were hard lessons that have been learned over 1,000 years that were built into that system. The system itself is not actually the problem. Some of you may not believe me, but it's actually not. If we obeyed the damn thing, if we actually did what our Constitution said, we would actually not have the vast majority of the problems that we're facing today. And we can get back there, but not easily, not continuing to do what we've always done. I regret to say that my generation has squandered what we were given. We took the most incredible freedom, the most incredible legacy, and we wasted it. I've lived a charmed life. I haven't faced a real war on my own homeland. I haven't faced a real recession. Globally speaking, look around the world. Yes, we face some hard times. I regret what's happening on the coast right now with the floods. We do face some natural disasters from time to time. But imagine facing the same natural disaster, but you live in Uganda or you live in the Soviet Socialist Republic, right? Imagine how much worse that is than being here. We won the lottery by being born here or by immigrating here. We did. And I'm sorry to say, we are not honoring our ancestors and we are not honoring our history in the way that we are behaving today. So let's get uncomfortable. Let's have a think about whether our obedience is actually a betrayal of the people that we say we love and that we say we care about. And maybe that disobedience is the way to honor our history and to win back our freedoms for our children. Oh, yeah. Let's have a think about it, right? And let's get uncomfortable. Let's talk to people about politics. Oh, I can't talk about politics with my friends. Yes, you can. If I can stand in front of a row of police holding rubber bullet guns, you can talk to someone about politics, right? If these gentlemen can stand in front of police and keep reopening and keep welcoming everybody, even after being fined and bullied, etc., you can have an uncomfortable conversation about politics. And you can stand on a polling booth and hand out how to vote cards, and you can put a cornflute in your front yard. Okay? Let's get busy. Let's get uncomfortable. And let's make sure that the hard-won victories that we've seen in the number of people in the streets of Melbourne, and in Canberra are reflected at the ballot box, because our future as a movement depends on it. Thank you very much.